come to you this morning to talk to you about something that's very close to my heart. And I'm not here to be divisive. I'm not here to offend anyone. I'm here to speak to you as Geronimo talked to a general in the 1880s in the mountains not too far from here, when he met with him at a peace conference, a powwow, and said to him, he said, this morning, he said, I want to speak to you the truth. And I want the truth to be like arrows that go out from my heart and my soul to your mind and your body. And I want each and every one of you to understand what I'm talking about this morning. You see, I'm very profoundly disturbed. I just left Tuskegee, where black folk are suffering. And I'm very disturbed when I go across this country, and I cannot find the sensitivities and the concerns about black folk in America that I want to see. And the only minister that I have seen and heard from any place in this nation has been Dr. Price, that is telling you what you should be listening to. And I've spoken all over this country and all over the world representing presidents and governors. And he is the only minister I've run into so far that violates all the social norms that were exacted on black folk back in the 1790s as this country began to move into an evangelical movement. And they decided in the 1790s that it is now permissible to have a black preacher or to have black folk invest themselves into a religious experience. And the establishment in this country says, yes, we will let blacks have their own separate services, but we must pick the minister. We must pick a minister that is controllable. And we must tell him exactly what he's supposed to do. We will license the ministers. So by the 1720s, the entire establishment in this country has set up a system saying that any black minister in this country, he has an admonishment. He must teach black folk three things so that religion will become a control device to help us maintain the status quo on black folk in this country. He says every black minister who we select or we license, they must teach black folk. First of all, when you talk about the Bible, you talk about the master and the slave, you are talking about the white master on earth and the black slave. You must secondly teach black folk to be humble and obedient and accept their life lot, and to be respectful and loyal to the white servant, to the white master. And lastly, you must teach black folk. You must teach black folk that they will get theirs in the hereafter, in pie in the sky. And that went into effect in the 1820s, and every black minister fell in the line and did it. And it stayed like that until after the Civil War, when 119 blacks on October the 19th walked into St. Paul's Church, Baptist Church in Raleigh, North Carolina, and says, we can't take it anymore. As black folk, the suffering is too acute. And said we must at least have 40 acres and a mule or something. You cannot just turn us loose, free, and say we're free, and give us non-economic emancipation where we are pennilessly, poor, impoverished, sick, broken, busted, uneducated, ignorant, homeless, nothing, and say we are now free. And that is the only minister, Dr. Price, that I've heard that understands that you got an obligation in the ministry to go above and beyond that admonishment put on black folk over 150 years ago. Now, in this area, maybe some of them don't like it. I don't care. I learned to respect a man at a distance, and I fell in love with him last night at dinner. And if I can ever be of any help to him in what he's trying to do, he's got my help and my institute's help. And so this morning, in the time that's been allotted to me, I want to talk to you, as I said, like Geronimo, but I want to be like the great European philosopher Diogenes, who walked through life with a lantern in his hand, saying, I want to lighten the darkness because I'm in search of an honest man. But like Diogenes, I want to walk through this temple and through black America with a new movement I'm trying to create. I want to find not necessarily an honest man. I want to find some black people and some white people that understand the problems in America. I want to find somebody that understands in America that contrary to popular myths, black folk are not progressing in America. Black people are going backwards. In comparative proportional terms, black people in America, where you were in 1850 in this country, you have not progressed. You're still in your same dilemma, contrary to anybody tells you. And you see, I want to find, like Diogenes, I want to find a black person that understands that black folk are not progressing. But more importantly, I want to find somebody, black or white, that don't mind being black and want to talk about the racial problem in this society. I can't even find that with my lantern in life. We got 3 or 4 major black organizations in America. 3. The Urban League, NAACP, the Rainbow Coalition, and one other one. I can't even get them to focus on the issue of black folk. One wants to take care of cultural diversity. One wants to be talking about multiculturalism. One wants to talk about minority issues. The other wants to talk about oppressed people. And I asked them across the country, why don't somebody talk about black folk and the problems of black people? And so I'm looking, like Diogenes, for a person that understands the history of this country, because I want to understand the problem in America. And the problem is not what you all have been taught. The problem is not poverty. It is not unemployment. It is not unwed teenage parents. It is not food stamps. It's not public housing. It is not drug abuse. Black people only got 2 problems in America. The first problem is that you've been systematically locked into the lowest level of a real-life monopoly game. That's your major problem. And that's what Dr. Price directly and indirectly is telling you about every Sunday morning. You have been locked into a no-win situation. That means that all the wealth and power in this country has been skewed over 400 years systematically into the hands of the majority white society. Black people don't own a significant amount of anything to be able to control their lives. Whites in America right now control almost 100% of all the income, the wealth, the power, the resources, the businesses, the privileges, and all levels of government. You cannot compete. And I'm tired of hearing people telling black folk, why don't you compete? Compete with what? What are you going to compete with? They keep saying, well, black folk can run fast and jump higher. That won't make it. It won't make it. And let me tell you what monopoly is. Monopoly means that all the wealth and power has been skewed based on skin color, going white, yellow, brown, black. And if you've never played the game of Monopoly, let me show you how it's played. I play it every year at my family. It means that everybody, when you sit down, you're given a certain amount of money and wealth. Black people never got their 40 acres and a mule. Now we're playing this game of Monopoly. And let's pretend for a second in this auditorium that whites got $1,000 to play the game of Monopoly. Asians got $500. Hispanics got $300. Indian got $100. And blacks got $50 to play the game of Monopoly. Now, never having gotten your 40 acres of mule, you don't own any land. You don't own any land. And if you don't have the money, you can't put any houses and hotels on the land if you got lucky and had some. Now, when you roll the dice in our hypothetical game of Monopoly, and you roll the dice and your number comes up on the wrong piece of property, what happens to you? You must either go bankrupt or go to jail. And that's the monopoly game that black folk are locked into. And when that happens to you in life, when you only got 2 alternatives in life, to either go bankrupt or go to jail, that is called an underclass. And black people in America are systematically being forced into a permanent underclass. We will be a permanent underclass by the year 2013. And you got about a 2.5-year window left. If we don't do some very specific things and start to come up with some very cogent strategies, comprehensive strategies of doing some things to focus on that number 1 problem of redistributing the wealth and power back into the hands of black folk, you can hang it up. Don't worry anymore about retiring. After the next 2 or 3 years, don't worry anymore about going to college. It ain't going to work. The doors are going to slam shut on black folk. And what I'm telling you right now is we're going to have to get it together fast. And to do it, you must first understand what I'm going to be telling you this morning. And my speech is going to be divided into 3 parts. I'm first going to tell you about the problems of black America realistically. As Cochise and Geronimo said, I'm going to give you the truth about the current state of black America, point 1. 2, I'm going to analyze it for you. And 3, I'm going to give you the solutions that we can do together to come out of it. Okay? Now, we got a very serious problem in that monopoly game. We're going to have a converging forces, social forces coming across this country. About 8 major forces are going to push us into that understructure and that underclass position. And let me talk about 3 or 4 of them right quick. First thing, across this country, you're going to have an increasing amount of conservatism. Now, I want you all to understand up front what conservatism means. So I don't care whoever uses that word, you know what it means. Conservatism is a new code word for anti-blackism. Okay? Except now, a conservative can stand right in your face and tell you and confess that he's a conservative, which means he is a racist and not tell you he's a racist. Racism, right now, we got racism all over America, and I can't find one racist. And what I'm telling you right now, before my book even hit the market, I'd already predicted in my book that you're going to have a cutback in welfare. I predicted in my book they're going to catch people like in Texaco. And they just caught Avis discriminating against blacks in North Carolina and South Carolina. And they just caught Circuit City, Sam's, Walmart's. I knew they were going to try to cut out single-member districts. I knew they were going to go after affirmative action. I knew there were going to be riots all over this country that's coming. I talked about this a long time ago in the book because that's what conservatism means. Conservatism comes from the root word to conserve. To conserve means to hold on to what you've got, or those who ain't got, as my mother said in a 3rd grade education, you ain't going to get. That's what conservatism means. And it means nothing else. It means maintain the status quo. It means use every device that you have to give the pretense that what you see is normal. And right now there's a conservative move in this country going from the White House across this land through the Congress that says whatever exists all over this nation and in Los Angeles is normal. They want you to believe that it's normal to go out in Los Angeles and see all the drug abuse and all the crime, all the poverty, and all the suffering of black folk lying and sleeping on the streets, drugged out, doped out. They want you to believe that's normal. That's what conservatism means, maintain the status quo. It also means to reinstitute white authority, white values, so you hear them talk about family values and all these other kind of things, and also white superiority. So when people start talking about they want to go back and be a conservative, you ask them, what are you trying to conserve? When my people don't own anything and you own 100%, what have I got to conserve? When you hear blacks going around screaming about they're a black conservative, you ask them, what are you conserving? Tell me one point in history that you found something that you want to conserve. Don't let people run that game on you about being a conservative. You tell them, say, fine, if you want to tell me what are you conserving? And when my people never had anything, why would they want to be a conservative? So the biggest problem we're going to have is conservatism when it goes across this nation. And we as black folk got to understand, now it's not all whites that are conservatives. There is an element that's got everything that want to make that it's the greed over need. They want to hold on to everything. And so, we're going to have a massive flow. Everybody's going to be talking about conservatism. You're going to see people politically switching, talking about they're moving to the far right. And what we have to do is understand that, and that's going to create major problems in this country. One, not only will you see an increasing amount of negative hostility towards black folk, every piece of research in the country tells us that, even from the Jewish organizations, that you're going to see more anti-blackness now and in the future than you've ever seen in the last 60 years since you left the civil rights movement. Two, we see organizations all over the country now, paramilitary groups, Aryan groups, Vipers, Freeman, Skinhead, Baldhead, all kind of groups that are organizing in optimistically expecting and anticipating a major clash in this country between blacks and whites. We've had 28 states in the United States now to pass concealed weapons laws. That's specifically so some of the white contingency groups can carry weapons and arms at all times. That's why you have such a major thrust from the National Rifle Association. That's why they're controlling most of your politicians. That's why you have such a major anti-governmental effort in this country. You hear people say, we want to go back to states' rights. We're anti-government. We want to get rid of the federal government. It's not that they're against government. They know that in history, the only people who've ever saved black folk has been the government, twice, the federal government. And if you eliminate the federal government by downsizing the government, black folk no longer have an ally. And if a clash occurs, you got nobody to come to the rescue a third time to help you. You see, you were pulled out of slavery by the federal government. You were pulled out of Jim Crowism by the federal government. There are contingencies in the country that says the next time there won't be a federal government to pull blacks out. And you hear them talk about their anti-government, that's what they're talking about. They're not against government. And later on you hear me tell about why they're not against government. Because you see, primary wealth in this country, the primary responsibility of government is to move wealth and to move power. And that's how the dominant society got its wealth and its power, by using government. But now they want to make sure black folk don't have access to it. That's why they're anti-affirmative action, but I'll get into all that a little later. But so the biggest thing, one of the biggest things that are going to drive us in this underclass structure will be conservatism. The second thing is that you're going to have an unending influx of immigrants into the country. And that's what Dr. Price is talking about. And nobody, no black politician, no black organization wants to deal with that issue. They will avoid it at all costs, even though in their hearts they know that's one of the biggest problems for black folk. We anticipate in the next 10 to 12 years approximately 8 to 6 million Hispanics coming into the United States and 41 million Asians. You have been the majority minority for 400 years in this country. You have been the number 2 population for 400 years. You're going to get kicked out of being number 2. You're going to go down and become number 4. Now, common sense, even a third grade education would tell you, if you didn't get anything when you were number 2, you all jumped ahead of me, but anyway, you can guess what you're going to get when you become number 4. And the worst part about it is as you descend and go down to number 4, those other groups are going to go up. And as they go past you, you're going to have major racial clashes in this country. You're going to have fights all over this country between blacks and Hispanics, blacks and Asians, blacks and poor whites. And black folk cannot fight all these groups. Everybody can not always be against black folk. They know that we are vulnerable and we are defenseless. And we cannot fight those groups. Because you see, they didn't come into this country with the legacies that we are stuck with. Everybody in America has an advantaged position but black folk. But all are in a state of denial. The white power structure in a state of denial. They are pretending that everything that they got, that 100% control and ownership of everything, they got it because they worked hard through a Protestant ethic. That's not how they got it. And you always hear them say, well, what you got to do, you got to work hard. Nobody can work any harder than a slave. But they're going to keep running these games on black folk. And at the same time, we got black folk that are accepting that what we got to do is work harder. And you see, when we get into that in a few minutes about history, what the power structure really wants is what we call unearned income. Slavery was nothing but unearned income for whoever owns the slave. And once slavery ended, that's where Wall Street came from. Wall Street was based on slavery. Everything that blacks were producing went to Wall Street then. And now that all that money that's amassed on Wall Street is still producing unearned income. All that money is producing a regular salary for people. It's in stocks and bonds and dividends. They don't have to work. Never had to work. But we're going to talk about that later on. So what I'm saying now is that you're going to have this massive influx of immigrants into the country that are better equipped. They don't have your legacies. They don't have your disadvantages. They're walking across the border, they're going to get a free lunch. They don't have to pay dues. But you got public policies in this country that are equating them to black folk. They're equating them to black, and what we've allowed them to do, starting in 1970, is to wrap themselves in black folks' suffering and pretend somehow they suffered along with black folk. And therefore, whatever program is created under this misguided label called minority, that they are equal to you and over you. And we're going to deal with that whole concept of minority in a few minutes too. So that's the problem with the influx of immigrants. And what they are doing is coming into the country and doing what we've never been allowed to do and we've never been bright enough to do in some senses, is to build your own communities. You got to build your communities. You see, every group that when they leave their homeland, the last thing they do is look in the mirror. They look in the mirror and say, I'm going to America. And I'm going to go to America, I'm going to find me a community or neighborhood. Or I'm going to build one with people who look like me. And so that's why you go all over this nation, where they're coming out of Asia. You will find Vietnamese towns all over California, little Cambodias. You'll find a Chinatown in every major city. You'll see the Hispanics come in. They'll build a little Mexico, a little Havana, a little Hialeah. You go up, you find little Italys, French towns, German towns, Greek towns, Polish towns, but you cannot find one black town. And we are the only people that keep trying to integrate. We're the only people, rather than looking in the mirror and saying, I see somebody that looks like me, I want to go find and build me a community of people who look like me. We're doing just the opposite. That's your second problem, is inappropriate behavior of black folk. We keep looking in the mirror and says, I want to get away from everybody that looks like me. You can't have any power and wealth doing that. If you don't have a community, you cannot rebuild Los Angeles without a black community. If I cannot come in this city, you can tell me where every black lives, where he stays, where he works. You don't have a community. And all of you that want to go in business, don't waste your time. You cannot start a business and operate without a town or community. Why can't you do it? Because without a community, you have no market. If you don't have a market, every black gonna go by your store at 200 miles an hour heading for the suburbs and heading for the malls. And that's why you got this major displacement of capital out of the black neighborhood. And I tell black folk, if you want to go in business today, don't do it. Give me the money. I need it. Because you're going to go bankrupt. 80% of all black folk that go into business under the present system, you will go bankrupt within 2 years. You will lose your money within 2 years because you don't have a market. And see, that's how the other groups function. They have their own markets, their own communities. And we're going to talk about that a little later on, too. See, the good Reverend Dr. Price, he gave me 2 hours to talk to you all, so I'm going to get to all those points, okay? So we got major problems. That's the second thing, is dealing with this influx of immigrants. And what I'm telling you is that they're not coming in here to be your partner or your ally. They're coming in to compete with you. And your black organization and your black leadership in this country is afraid to teach black folk how to compete with all these other groups. And they're afraid because they keep trying to create allies with them. You cannot ally with anybody who's planning on supplanting you. You see, if you go check the Council of La Raza, you check the Council of Salala, if you check the National Hispanic Defense League, if you check the National Hispanic Party, the first thing that all of them have is to change the issues in this country from white and black to white and Hispanic. They're planning on supplanting you. When the National Hispanic Party started in Miami in 1974, I was in the governor's office there. I was the only black in politics. That was the first item on their agenda, saying by the year 2000, they want to take blacks out of the equation. And that's why, as Dr. Price just said, that's why they control South Florida. They play to win. We play to play. Okay? And when I leave here today, I want you all forevermore in helping Dr. Price to play to win. Okay? The third thing that's going to hurt us and push us into this underclass structure is technology. You got blacks running all over the country telling black folks, some people, well, what we're going to do, we can overcome racism if we get involved in technology. Won't happen. Technology has never been a friend and ally of black folk. It has always been our worst enemy. Why has it been? Because you see, racism has always kept us in our place. And technology has always come along and run over that place. That's why technology has always been our enemy. See, when you keep a black man as the porter, then all of a sudden you come along with a floor sander, he's gone. You keep him as the elevator operator and you put a computer in the elevator. You keep him as a dishwasher and you get an automatic dishwasher. You all understand what I'm telling you? So when black people come to you telling you, well, you get technology, no. You say, no. What we have to do is to get control of, get behind technology so to stop running over us. And I got friends in Washington, D.C. going all over this country telling black folk, you got to get into the information highway. And you can overcome racism. Whites were not that dumb. You cannot get on the information highway and overcome racism. Because the information highway is like any other highway. It's a transportation system. And what you should be asking yourself is, what are you transporting? If you don't have anything to transport, you can't get on the information highway. So what we got to be talking about as black folk is owning and controlling. It's just like when they invented the highway, the airplane system, the shipping system, the train system. It didn't advantage black folk because we never owned the trains, the planes, and the ships. What we got to do right now, starting with your church, is try to figure out how we can own and control more. Then the highway makes sense to us. Okay? Now, and that's why right now in Washington, D.C., the Office of Technology's last report says that the people going to be hurt most by technology are going to be black folk. And a fellow named Jeremy Rickman has a book out called The End of Work. And he is the director of the National Economic Trends for Washington, D.C. and nationally. He's the guy to put out these trends. He put a book out, and his book, Chapter 5, talks about what technology is going to do to people, and he uses black folk as an example. And I went and sat down and talked with him. And what he says to Dr. Anderson, he said, my publishers tried to make me take that chapter out of the book. He said, I fought to keep it in. He said, because technology is going to kill black folk. And read that book, and that's what he's talking about. He says, because black folk don't have any control of technology. You don't own anything. And that's why we're getting ready to lose all our radio stations in this country. We're going to lose all of our television stations in this country. Because what's happening now, they've lifted the allocation cap, and now it's called social Darwinism, economic Darwinism. Whoever got the most money now can buy anything they want in technology. And so the few black stations we got in the United States now up for grabs. And as a matter of fact, even the cable system is going to be up for grabs because we don't have the money and resources. We can't compete with the whites now who want to buy all the systems. And once that happens, you can't get your information in. Now, that would not happen to organizations, to groups like the Hispanics. Because, see, the Hispanics got smart enough, they built communities. Then they took their language and they built a fence around their communities. They use their culture to protect their communities. Where is your culture in Los Angeles for black folk? Where is your fence? And we're going to talk about that later on. You are vulnerable. The fourth thing that's going to happen to you is that this whole contract with white America is not anti-liberalism. It is not anti-Democratic Party. It wasn't even anti-Clinton. What it was they were trying to answer a question that's been haunting white America for about 30-something years. And that is, what do you do with 36 million obsolete black folk? That's what the contract was for. And how they concluded that was, you see, they got 1,200 white think tanks in America. 1,200 white think tanks. You got one wholly owned black think tank, and that's the Harvest Institute I'm trying to run. They got 3,000 employees with a $500 million budget. I got a few volunteers. No staff, no money. Because you see, in this country, no blacks wants to give my black think tank any money to help our leaders to develop policy and public issues. And when I ask them for money, what they say is that we can't give you money. I said, why not? They said, what is your organization for? I said, to help black America. They said, who's going to benefit? I said, black folk. They said, who's going to work in it? I said, black folk. They said, ooh, too black. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, how can you be too black? What is too black? 10, 20, 30? What's too black? Nobody ever says something is too Jewish, too Indian, too Asian. And I'm telling you, people are telling me this too blackness comes from our black entertainers, our black athletes that's making $100 million. They could give the money to us that they're paying in taxes because we're tax exempt. But they'd rather give it to the government than even give it to an organization to help black folk in this country. Because they don't want to be black. And I keep trying to tell them, it doesn't hurt that much being black. Now, let me move a little fast. I'm talking too slow. I'm going to speed up now, go real fast. You all keep up with me. Now, what's going to happen now, what these think tanks decide to do in the contract with America, they found out through their research that approximately 68 to 7% of all the blacks in America work in some level of government. This happened as a direct result of the civil rights movement. See, at the end of the civil rights movement, instead of moving against the problem to get more wealth and power for black folk, our civil rights organizations pushed us over and looking for jobs. And so all of our black folk, then over 50 to 60% of all the blacks that got jobs after the civil rights movement went into government. So 68 to 70% of all the blacks in America are working either in federal government, city government, state government, county government, libraries, and school systems. So when you hear white folks talking about downsizing government, what they're talking about are de-employing and disemploying black folk. They know that. They know that. So in Washington, D.C., they plan on firing 480,000 people. And what the Office of Management and Budget, right out of the White House, says is that for every white person who gets fired, we're going to fire 2 blacks. Now, if you're only 12.3% of the population, and you're going to fire 2 blacks for every white, you're going to be devastated. Now, let me give you the real picture, even before they started firing black folk. Let me give you the real, true options for black folk. There's only 3 things that you can do in this world as a black person to earn a living and survive. You either must work, go on welfare, or you steal. Now, for those who missed that, let me give it to you again. You either work up here, you go on welfare here, or you steal down there. You're talking about your crime problem. I'm going to show you how you get into your crime problem. Now, right now at the top level, everybody prefers to work. Now, I just told you that 68 to 70% of all the black folk are working in government. 26 to 28% of the rest of the blacks are working in white corporations. And those white corporations are going to follow the government. They're going to downsize. You're going to see IBM cutting back, Apple Computers, and Meritech, Lucent Tech, now all of them going to cut back. Only 2% of the blacks in America work in their own stores and their own business in their own communities. Only 2% that are not vulnerable. Only 2% of blacks are not vulnerable. The rest are vulnerable in America. Now look at the problem at the top. Now, contrary to what anybody tells you, the unemployment problem in America is not 5.2% you hear every day in the newspapers and read. That is not about black folk. That's about whites. They're only talking about people who are either getting unemployment compensation or looking for jobs. That's how they're getting that figure. The unemployment rate in America for black folk today is 34% nationally. Now, if you want to understand how devastating that is, think for a second. Follow me along. Think about this. When the unemployment rate in America for whites went up to 25% in the 1920s, they called it a depression. Now, the unemployment rate for blacks hasn't even come down to 25%. But when the unemployment rate went up for whites and hit 25%, they used every level of government. They said it's a depression and every piece of machinery, money, anything must be used to bring that unemployment rate down. And now with black unemployment rate, not at 25%, at 34%, nobody cares. They say we can't, that's not the role of government to help with the employment problem. 34% for blacks nationally. Now in Detroit, Michigan, Baltimore, and New York, the unemployment rate is 45%. Don't think that's bad yet. I'm giving you the worst stuff yet. In Pittsburgh, it is 49%. And for black youth in this country, it is 57%. That's why you got your problem out here on the streets. Because nobody wants to give you the true facts about why you got problems. Now that's at the top level. Now when you kick those people out of those jobs in the government and out of those corporations, they must go down to the second level. I'm going to show you how you get into your underclass. You kick them down to the second level. But the conservatives in this country have already made preparation for you when you come down to the second level. That's called welfare. They got preparation. They said, when you come down here, don't plan on staying here. We just had welfare reform, which means you can't stay here on the second floor either. And now to do welfare, actually, you can only be on welfare for 2 years. We're going to kick you off of that, which means you must go down to the next level. But before they kick you off the second level, look at the second level already. The poverty level in America for black folk is 35%. That means 35% of all the black people in this country got a zero, negative, nil, none net worth. That means they own nothing. 35%. 47% of all the black children in America are beneath the poverty level. I just left New Orleans. New Orleans. That's why I had tears in my voice and my eyes a few minutes ago when I talked about leaving New Orleans and Tuskegee University. In New Orleans, the poverty rate there for black folk is 80%. And somebody got to wake up. You can't stand that kind of poverty. Anyhow, I'm sorry. The poverty rate for black youth in this country is 47%. That means they can't even make daily bread. For black female-headed households, it is 52%, with 2 children in the family. And nobody cares. Nobody cares. And so they're going to now have welfare reform to kick them off the second level. So now they must go down to the next level. Next level is crime. Your crime rate in America is going to go straight up within the next 2 and 2.5 years. Straight up. Because, see, black folk are not simply going to disappear, they evaporate. Even if you don't care about them, they're not going to evaporate. Now, let's look at the crime rate already. In the most productive years for a black man in this country, but all these black men in this room, your most productive years are between 20 and 35 years of age. And already, 40% of all the black men in America are either in prison, on parole, or probation. 40%. And black women want to know why they don't have any husbands or fathers to their children. In the state prisons, 47% of your state prisoners are black. 52% of your federal prisoners are black. And 96% of all the prisoners in the United States, all the black prisoners, 96% are black men. And nobody cares. Nobody seems to care. Now, this is not new. Because you see, what's going to happen now, you're going to have a new growth industry in this country. The new growth industry is going to be owning, operating, and building prisons and selling services and goods to them. And there are 2 major corporations right now, I won't give you the names, have already set up a big contract to take over some of the monies of it. The government passed what's called the Omnibus Crime Bill for $29 billion to build more prisons in the United States. And 2 big companies have found out they can get $82,000 for every jail cell they build and $27,000 a year to operate the prison per prisoner. And just in all those black prisoners you find, just the black male prisoners, for supplying them with shaving lotion, underarm deodorant, and soap, that is a $3 billion a year industry, and black people don't get a penny out of it. People are already making money off of our people in prison. And nobody even cares about where the money is going and how they're making the extra money, even after they criminalize you. Now, this criminalization process didn't start here, so let me get with the public policy and show where everything started, and let's analyze it with history very quickly. The whole problem goes back to 1619. In 1619, there was no such thing. Y'all be clear on this. There was no such thing, basically, as racism. Racism didn't exist before black slavery started. You had conflicts between ethnic groups. You had conflicts between religious groups. And you had cultural disagreements. But you never had racism until black enslavement started. Racism is a word that means race. It means group. I don't want you to let people keep telling you that black people can be racist. You cannot be racist. The word does not exist for you. Racism means group-based. Racism means a power relationship. A power relationship between two groups, where one group owns and controls so much that they can use their wealth and their powers to deprive and hurt and injure another group. That's what racism is. And no place can you find a black person on earth that can be a racist. Only thing you can get at best is a black reactionary. That means a black person who's reacting to white racism. And I want people to quit calling Farrakhan a racist. Farrakhan is not a racist. What Farrakhan is doing is reacting to white racism. If black folk had been racist, they'd have been racist 400 years ago. They would have stopped people from depriving and hurting and castrating and lynching and exploiting them 400 years ago. That's why if you go back through history, you cannot find one single solitary instance any place in history on this earth where black folk have had enough power and wealth to come together to do injury to another group and take something from them. In the United States, you've never seen any blacks come together as an organization, as a group, to hurt any other group. Blacks have never done anything to Jews or to whites or anybody else, Asians or Hispanics, as a group. We can't practice racism. We don't even have a community to practice racism. But on the other hand, I can go through history books and I can show you mountains, thousands, maybe millions of instances where everybody else have done things mean to us, to deprive and hurt us, by social customs, by extra legal and legal means, by laws to do in black folk. You can't be a racist unless you got power and wealth for your group to be able to hurt other people and take and do them in, and we don't have it. So all we are reactions to white racism. And so in 1619, when they started bringing blacks into this country, they brought blacks in this country for the very specific reason, initially, as indentured servants. They were sold off a Dutch ship for water and supplies. Blacks did reasonably well in the United States between 1619 and 1920, about 1924, 1925, in that general time frame. They served out their indentureship. Between 1626 and 1638, they began to intermingle with whites. Some of them intermarried and interbred. In 1638, the founding stone for racism in America was laid. The state of Maryland put out the first public edict that started racism for blacks in America. They put out an edict, a public policy called the Doctrine of Exclusion. The Doctrine of Exclusion says that black people should never be permitted to enjoy the fruits of white society. That became the doctrine of racism in America in 1638. Now, that was called the Doctrine of Exclusion. That meant every time you get a chance, exclude black folk out of it. I don't care what it is, exclude them out. What is out of, nowadays, out of welfare, food stamp, whatever it is, exclude them out. Business, anything you can do. Now, that went on from 1638 to 1666, 1665 and more specifically. In 1665, something happened. Because during that period, they were trying to find a way to build the United States. And the European colonial powers were saying, I sent you whites to America to build America, to use the land, to bring resources, to find gold and silver and products back to Europe. And the colonial powers, contrary to what you read in the history books, they did not come here for religious freedom. They weren't fools. They could have gone any place in Europe and worshiped. There was nothing but woods and bushes and trees over there. They came here specifically to get wealth and resources and gold. And what they kept telling the European colonial powers was that we can't do anything with America because we don't have a labor force. And somebody said, yes, we do have a labor force. So you remember that group back in 1638 that Maryland shut out under the doctrine of exclusion? That's our labor force. So at that point in time, what they did then, they passed what were called enslavement laws. They passed enslavement laws, and they took the doctrine of exclusion and expanded it. So that not only did the doctrine of blacks to be excluded, but now blacks were to be excluded, subordinated, non-compensated, non-competitive work group, a labor force for the personal comfort and wealth building of white society. That was what the slave code said explicitly and implicitly. That's been the problem that you've had now for 400 years. It decided how you were to be treated. Those slave codes again. And remember this, on anything that goes on in Los Angeles, you can tell when your policy affects it. Blacks will be excluded, subordinated, non-compensated, non-competitive, managed workforce for the personal comfort and wealth building of white society. That stayed in effect until about 1705. 1705, the slave codes were passed. Very important. What the slave codes did was to tell everybody, whites on one side and blacks on one side, how you were to treat black folk and how whites were to behave towards each other. It says that every white person must accept how black folk were to be treated. They must accept the public policy. And that every white institution, every white church, every white business, every white school, every white level of government, and every white individual must treat black folk in an exploited, subordinated, excluded manner. Any white person who deviated from that, he could be hurt and injured and lynched. Even whites could not deviate from that policy. And no white person could raise a black person up to make him equal to a white person. And on the other side of the slave codes, it told how blacks were to be treated. Blacks were not to be permitted to be equated to whites in any respect. A white person could not enter a room without a white person's permission. A black person could not enter a group carrying a conversation without permission. He could not carry a weapon, a tool. He could not raise his hand to defend himself. He could not strike a white person. He could not be called out after dark on certain times, carrying a weapon. And he couldn't even look out, some cases, he couldn't even look out the same window the whites looked out of. That was a subordination. He could never be put in a position of power and authority. Now, those what the slave codes did. And also the slave codes attached to that was called the Diversity Act of 1705. It says to make sure this thing works, every time you get 6 black folk together, make sure there's 1 white person included. That was to always monitor black folk, to make sure they never did any planning, that they never did anything that could be injurious to them. So by 1710, things really started picking up all over the world. 6 out of every 7 persons coming across the Atlantic were black folk coming to America. 6 out of 7 were blacks. For the first 300 years, coming this way west were blacks. Just in between, to show you what they were doing, from 1500 to 1660 as an example, they shipped 5 million black folk out of Africa just to Central America down here to dig for gold and silver. And in 150 years, black folk with tools and sticks and stones, they dug out over 16,000 tons of silver and over 4,000 tons of gold. All that went back to Europe. Black folk at that point in time were producing almost 99% of all the sugar on earth, cotton, tobacco, anything else. They were building all the houses. They were the caulkers, builders. So what they did then, they started advertising in Europe. So anybody wants to get wealth, they go to America. You go to America, we guarantee you. We give you free land and free labor. And you would have to be an idiot to come to America to give you free land and free labor and not get rich. So they began, and by 1710, somebody said, well, how are we going to control all these blacks? So the state of Virginia passed a law called meritorious manumission. Meritorious manumission then says that we will control blacks by building in an internal attitude inside of them to make them see things through our eyes, to make them white in everything but skin color. And what the meritorious manumission was passed by the state of Virginia in 1710 then said we will reward any black who gets very good at this. And so if any black person saves a white person's life, protects a white person's property, invents something that a white person can make money off of, or if he squeals on in the slave revolts, he would get freedom. Okay? And so I tracked from 1710, all the way up to 1860s. And out of over 200 some possible slave revolts, a black person squealed in every one of them. And so by following that up, so in 1712, there's a guy named Willie Lynch, 2 years later down in Jamaica. He heard about the law, and he came up to Virginia and says, I know how to do it. I can help you set up a system where black folk will never, ever organize and come together again. He says, I got a lot of experience in the islands on treating blacks. And so that's what y'all heard about the Willie Lynch letter. That's what that case. So Willie Lynch came up 2 years later, and they paid Willie Lynch to be a consultant to carry out what was enacted in Virginia in 1710. He says, I would divide blacks along lines of sex, along lines of skin color, along lines of age, tribe, everything. He said, in that way, they'd never get organized again. They would never, ever have a community. I would divide them so they'd never have a community that would be functional. And Willie Lynch started that, and as Willie Lynch started that, blacks began to squeal on each other. 100 years later, by 1840, for instance, I had over 6,000 blacks in the United States that were slave owners. 6,000 blacks owned other slaves by 1840. Because as soon as they got free under meritorious manumission, they ran out and tried to be white and hired and bought them some black slaves. And then when you saw tears coming out of my eyes, I just thought about, again, I was thinking about down in New Orleans. Down in New Orleans, and blacks down there saying, Dr. Anderson, what can bring us together? And I said, you got a big problem. They said, why? And that's why I had the tears. Let me tell you something. In New Orleans was the epitome of black folk doing in other black folk. On the eve of the Civil War in New Orleans, you had almost approximately 812 free blacks in New Orleans on the eve of the Civil War. 642 owned other black slaves. Then in the Civil War, New Orleans put together 2 full regiments of blacks to fight with the South to keep slavery. And worse than that, one of the biggest revolts, slave revolts, occurred in New Orleans, where blacks tried to break free. And do you know that the free blacks joined the white plantation owners and went and put down the black slave revolt? And the worst part about it, they chopped off all the heads of all the blacks that were revolting and put them on poles leading all the way from Jefferson Parish all the way into the city of New Orleans as a warning against any other blacks trying to get free of the system. And see, that hurts me when I hear about that. And so, you see, you got that meritorious manumission policy saying, keep black folk divided. So between 1712 now and up until the Civil War, some things started happening that's very profound for you all in understanding your racial situation out here. By 1750, black folk peaked out. The population of blacks in America got up to 34%. And then the white society got very scared with that. They said, with that kind of number in this country, there's a possibility that blacks might get together with Indians. So then in every treaty that whites were signing with Indian treaties, they put an incentive in there for the Indians to turn against black folk. They say every time you catch a black, you're to turn him in. And they would pay an Indian $20 on average to chase down an escaped runaway slave, to track him in the woods and bring him back to his plantation. And because of that, Indians in America allied with the white dominant society. And I keep hearing blacks bragging about the fact how much Indian blood they got. Indians were not your friends in history. They were not your friends. And I don't mean to put the Indians down. Indians got special problems. I'm not putting anybody else down. I'm not going to put the Hispanics down. I'm going to tell you the truth. And out of the 5 civilized tribes out of the 5 civilized tribes in the United States, all five of them sided with the South to keep slavery. In a 20-year period between 1840 and 1860, the biggest killers of blacks in America were Indians. And see, the Indians then, so that's what they were trying to get, that kind of an ally between whites and Indians, so that blacks could not ally with them. And that's why every civilized tribe was a slave trader. Indian tribe was a slave trader and a slave owner. As a matter of fact, in Camp Smith, right not too far from me in Texas, in 1867, in Camp Smith, the Choctaws and the Chickasaws still had slaves even 2 years after the war and wouldn't turn them loose. And the United States government gave them $300,000 to turn black slaves loose, the Chickasaw and Choctaw Indians, and said, we'll give you $300,000 and take this money and divide it up and turn those black slaves loose and give them some land. And they never, but 2 years later in 1869, blacks were coming to Washington saying the Indians never gave them anything. And to this day, blacks never got a penny from the Indians. So what I'm saying is everybody has been against blacks because we've never been united. But so when I leave here after today, I want you all to be together, okay? And so by 1750, we hit 34 population. That scared, the colonies were scared. So they started petitioning England to quit shipping any more slaves in. And that's what triggered the Revolutionary War. And one of the biggest things was that they were scared that blacks and Indians might somehow get together and take over the country. And so after the war was over, well, let me get before that. Then the Constitution was written. When the Constitution was written, what they did, they went back and picked up the slave codes I told you about, the slave codes and enslavement laws. That's why in the United States Constitution they classify you as 3/5 of a human being, why they passed the Fugitive Slave Act, and why they condone, okay, slavery. That's why you got locked into that whole system. Because what they did then was give all the power to the slaveholding states in the South. And the first compromise was committed at that time. And what happened then, the wealthy whites in the country says, we will allow people to keep slaves, but we'll always protect poor whites. And so they started a system saying, wealthy whites up here, poor whites here, blacks down there. So even if you're a wealthy white, you'll make sure that poor whites are at least the management class, that they're over the blacks, they're the supervisors. So the blacks go into the ditch, the white will stand over it, the poor white will be over the ditch. If you put a black person on the truck, the white will drive the truck. Okay? That was a commitment that was made that poor whites would always come at least right above blacks. And I'm going to show you how that got into all our national public policies later on. And so between that, that was built into the Constitution. Now they developed a system in this country. I hope my time is on. Is my time running? Okay. So they built into the Constitution, right after the Constitution was initiated, they built the Constitution based on the premise that you're going to have a social democracy. Very important for black folk. A social democracy means that the majority will win, the minority will lose and suffer. But also in the Federalist Papers, it says that the majority then can never do anything to stop the minority from becoming a majority. And it is the majority's responsibility to protect the minority. And as soon as the Constitution was built on that, it was violated next year, 1 year later. Whites in America never accepted that it was their responsibility to protect black folk if you're going to make them a minority. They're talking about black folk shouldn't be out now chasing civil rights as a minority. They know that as a minority you can't win. You don't have the power. It is the majority's responsibility to take care of the minority. Not the minority's responsibility to fight for something you can't get. You don't have the power. And that was violated because in 1790, the first act of the Congress, right after the country was organized with the Constitution, the first law says this is a white country and the quota on black folk is 0. Which means you got a 0 quota, you can only come into this country as a slave. At that moment, black people became the only permanently planned minority in the country. You become the only planned loser. Remember, the minority means loser. Anytime you use the word minority, you call yourself a loser. Don't ever use that word. Okay? You call yourself a loser. So their first act of Congress was to pass an act saying it's a white nation, got a 0 quota on blacks except for slaves. Nobody else you see in that minority category is there a law on you. Nobody says how many women you can have. how many gays you can have, how many handicapped, how many veterans you can have. Only blacks. That's why you cannot get Haitians into the country, because you got a zero quota. That quota was changed in 1966 and raised to 1/2 of 1%, where you got a few can drift in from the Caribbean, but they know you can't compete because you got 2 million Hispanics coming in every year. And that's why you can get suffocated to death. As a matter of fact, jumping ahead of myself for a second to show you what I mean about the influx and how they're going to suffocate you. In 1840s, you did not have one single Asian or Hispanic in the entire United States. But you had 5 million black folk that were enslaved. 5 million black folk were enslaved, but you did not have one Asian and one Hispanic. By the Civil War, you had 6,000 Hispanics. By 1900, you had 100,000 Hispanics. You had 100,000 Hispanics in 1900, but you got 11 million blacks. And they got the same identical birth rate. Here are blacks, here are Hispanics. Here are blacks, here are Hispanics. They got the same birth rate. Now they're going to pass blacks. You know why? You can't come into the country and fight and protect yourself by numbers. You are a permanent loser. And that's why you're going to be overwhelmed in this area. You cannot win if they can't let you get your population up. And the major issue they're going to fight for is keeping the doors of immigration open so they can become the dominant population over you. They know you cannot bring in your people. And that's why you had 3,000 blacks on a boat off the west coast of Liberia, Africa, for about 2.5 months, and nobody even called them in. They were sick and hungry. No country would take them in. The United States has never had an immigration policy for black folk to bring in blacks, because they want you to stay in a minority category and loser category. And so what we're going to be talking about when we talk about solutions in a little while is that the only way you win is that you got to learn that when you accidentally become the majority, you immediately start acting like the majority. Get out of the minority category. Don't ever let anybody call you a minority. If they're going to call you anything, make them call you the only non-immigrants in America. Okay? Every public policy that you develop, every program that you develop it for non-immigrants. When you develop it for non-immigrants, you get into a special category with just black folk. You immediately, that word non-immigrant reconnects you with your history. It reconnects you with how you got here. It reconnects you with your culture and your past. Right now, you have no past and no culture and no future. And another thing it does when you start using the word non-immigrant is that you jump ahead of all the other groups. As immigrant takes on a negative, you say, hey, I'm not an immigrant, I'm a non-immigrant. And what you also do, you stop whites from bragging about my daddy came from Poland, my daddy came from Germany. You stop them from doing that by saying, hey, you're an immigrant then. I was here before you. See, 97% of all the black people in the United States were here before 97% of all other people here are even arrived today. Remember that. Very important. When somebody starts telling you to go back where you came from, you say, hey, 97% of my people here before y'all ever arrived. And so if anybody's going to leave, the last leave first. And the people who developed everything should stay here, because everybody else got a free ride. So let me tell you what happened between 1710 and 1712 and the Civil War. Let me show you what blacks did in terms of accumulating the wealth. Nobody else accumulated the wealth. The wealth was in black slaves. They keep flipping things over, tricking my people, making you believe that somebody worked hard and that they got their money from land. They did not get their money from land. Land had no value. Land had absolutely no value. You can get all the free land you wanted in America. They had head rights and land grants that gave out millions of acres of land whoever wanted. You could go in the United States and go out to what we call the frontier, where Indians were, and say, I own from here to that mountain, drive a stick in the ground, go down and file a claim. Only time land had value when you put a slave on it. And according to President Jackson, he says that immediately a black slave would bring 75% of the value to the land. So between the time of enslavement and the Civil War, whites in America invested $8 billion into buying slaves. And when they talked about freeing the slaves, they demanded their money back. And they asked for reparation. They sent a letter to Lincoln saying, we'll turn the black slaves loose, but you give us back our $8 billion. President Lincoln, you all don't know it, he sent a letter to Congress asking for $8 billion in reparations. Congress says, you know, that kind of money doesn't even exist. That's more money than all of our businesses and the federal budget put together. And that's one of the triggering mechanisms for the Civil War. They didn't have that kind of money. As a matter of fact, from the period I just told you about from 1710 to the Civil War, 2 out of every 3 people in the United States that had over $100,000, 2 out of every 3 lived in the South. A white plantation owner in the South who had black slaves had 400 times the wealth of a northern farmer. A white person in the South with 2 slaves had a value equal to any non-farmer in the North. If I take the white person in the North and add his house, his land, his animal, his tools, and his savings together, if you own 2 black slaves in the South, you had as much as a white person in the North. In the South, up until the Civil War, a black slave was an American Express card, a walking Visa card. A white person did not have to work. All they'd do in the morning was get up and get his 2 slaves off to work and lay and wait for them to come back. He didn't have to work. On the eve of the Civil War, to show you what that means in terms of having a slave, black people in the South, on the eve of the Civil War, picked and sold alone over 1 billion pounds of cotton and was sold just to England alone. England paid 48 cents a pound for that cotton. That cotton, that money from that cotton, gave every white person in the United States $500 without even working. On the eve of the Civil War. So what I'm telling you is that they didn't get their wealth from working hard. And I went back and looked in 1860 and said, in 1860s, what did black folk own, even the free blacks? In that time, poor blacks that were free in America, the blacks in general, they had 1/2 of 1% of the wealth in 1860. I checked again in 1960 and see what they'd accomplished. After a Civil War, World War I, Depression, World War II, Vietnam War, Korean War, and the Civil Rights Movement. See what blacks went up 1% in 100 years and all those catastrophic national, international events. The wealth was frozen in 1860. And even today, blacks control less than 2% of the wealth. You have not moved. Blacks don't own anything that has any value over 2%. So what I'm saying to you now is that that's where the wealth came from. And starting from 1860 up to now, that became what we call inherited wealth. The white society nailed that wealth down. So that now that it's passed on from one white generation to the next, to their offsprings, children, parents to child, parent to child. It's been going on now for 15 or 16 generations. And what does that mean for you as a black person? That means that the average white person, because racism exists, and without racism it wouldn't be important. Because racism exists, every white person is born with 87% of what he needs to be successful in life with his skin color when he hits the earth. All he needs to do is be successful now, is get a scheme in his head and persevere. Because everything he needs is either in his culture, in his community, in his neighborhood, in his family, in his school, in his business, and in his government. He's going to run into it sooner or later just by staying a straight course. And for that reason, you see, Ted Turner and Donald Trump can go bankrupt, become a millionaire, go bankrupt, become a millionaire over and over again. Doesn't make any difference. A black person, if he ever becomes a millionaire one time, you've got to hold on because he'd never do it twice. Because, see, a black person is born with 0. Why is he born with 0? When a white child comes in with 87%, a black child comes in with 0. Because it's called inherited wealth. I just told you everything is locked into the white culture. And so a black child cannot inherit anything because what we've been focusing on. We have been dealing with symptoms and not problems. For all these years, we talk about how can a black kid cannot inherit food stamps. He can inherit welfare. He can inherit public housing. He cannot inherit a job. So he comes in at zero. He cannot compete against a white child because as parents, you're letting them down. You're not giving your child a fair break. He can't compete. And I don't care how much you're going to scream at these black kids about what they should be doing. They are not crazy. You're not giving them any tools. You're trying to motivate kids. You cannot motivate a child to be successful. Motivation only means giving people interest in doing something. What you got to do, working with Dr. Price, you got to empower these young people. There's a difference between motivating people and empowering. I see all these blacks running around the country, I'm a motivational speaker. That's a pimp and a hustler. You don't motivate black folk, you empower them. Now here's the difference between motivation and empowering. I can motivate everybody in this auditorium this morning to want to go to Europe and lay on the beach and enjoy a good life, lay at the hotel and eat well. I can motivate you. But if I don't give you the money, the tools, y'all understand what I'm saying? And I don't give you the tools, the ships, the boat, the airplane, the hotel, I'm playing games. Am I not? And that's what they keep doing with black folk. They always want to motivate black folk rather than empower them. And what I talk about all the time, all this country, and I'm going to work with Dr. Price on, is that give you those tools. You give black folk the tools, and they'll do the job. Okay? I'm watching the clock. I don't know how much time I've spent so far. Am I fine? 47 minutes? Okay. I got 47 minutes. Let me wrap it up then. So give them the tools. They can be successful. But they won't always want to motivate blacks. And that's why we came out of slavery. What they did, they gave blacks what I call non-economic emancipation. Then when we came out of Jim Crow, they gave us non-economic integration. See, money never entered the picture. Why didn't it enter the picture? Because here's why it's important for you all to remember this. Because at the Civil War, that was the dividing line. That was the first time that land became more important than a black slave. Okay? And that's why you all didn't get the 40 acres and a mule. Okay? Because that was the first time when they said nobody could ever own slaves anymore, then the value jumped from a slave to land. And they said, then blacks won't get any. And you never got your 40 acres and a mule. That means you were vulnerable, you couldn't compete, you had no place to go, you were homeless, penniless, and you suffered 260 years of planned ignorance, so you couldn't do anything. And so then the second compromise was committed. Immediately after the Civil War was over, the North then sold blacks out. They looked at the poor whites in the South and said, well, now that we've taken all the wealth out of the South, because what we really want to do, what we were fighting the Civil War over, was to take the wealth from the South and move it to the North. And now that we got the wealth, you all can have the South again, and you can have those blacks. And so immediately in 1866, the South passed what's called the Black Codes. The Black Codes were nothing but the same code what I told you earlier in 1705 called the Slave Codes. So it re-enslaved black folk. And you went back into second slavery that they called Jim Crowism. Now, what was the effect of Jim Crowism? Let me show you. Up until that point in time, black folk were the primary labor force in the United States because nobody else wanted to work. All whites in America want to be the genteel class. They want to be the lazy class. They want to be able to, the aristocrats. They didn't want to work. They didn't want to get their hands dirty. But what they had done, though, by that time, black folk were the caulkers, the mechanics, the bricklayers, the plumbers. Blacks made up almost 50 to 60% of all the workers in the factories, in the tobacco factories, and the iron factories, and the mines in the East. In the South alone, after the Civil War, according to the 1865 census, that out of 120,000 artisans mean educated or skilled people in the South, people who could do the job, the work, out of 120,000, 100,000 were blacks. So by 1867, it got tricky. Now that the war is over, America then started their little game with the immigrants again. So between 1866 In 1880, they brought in 12 million European immigrants into America. And guess what happened to poor blacks again? They got booted out of those positions. They got kicked out. In the North, they created something called UNIONS, unions. They created unions and kicked blacks out of all those jobs I just told you about as mechanics and plumbers and engineers and bricklayers and all this kind of stuff. They kicked them out and started unions. Then they put a clause in it's a white-only union. They kept blacks out of jobs up until the 1960s, almost 100 years. Just shut them out. They did the same thing in the South. They created what's called farmer alliances. Even though 55 to 60% of all the farmers in the South were blacks, they created farmer alliances so black folk could not raise their products and sell their products and get to market. That's why the black farmers were crying over in Tuskegee. Said nobody. As a matter of fact, it just made the front pages of the Washington Post. What day was it? Thursday. Front page of Washington, what happened to the black farmers right today. They can't raise anything. They can't raise their crops. If they're raising, they don't have a distribution system. They don't have a market because they don't have a community. Nobody can get the crops from Tuskegee, from the South to New York City because, see, the white won't let you use their system to do it unless they control it, manipulate, and they get the profit and advantage. So those poor farmers down there are losing their land at three times the rate of white farmers. In 1920, we had 20 billion acres of land, 20 million acres of farmland in the United States belonged to blacks. It's down to less than about 400,000 acres now. You're going out of existence. And as the food crop moves further and further away from black folk into the hands of 2 or 3 major corporations, you're in serious trouble. Because 78% of all the blacks in America now live in 10 large cities. You got a 10-day food supply. If somebody wanted to, they can starve all the blacks in America to death in less than 2 weeks. Your farm, you're losing your farmlands and everything else. Nobody want to make an issue out of it. The Washington Post had the front pages saying the black farmers are almost gone. But anyhow, so what happened then after the Civil War? The immigrants came in, bumped blacks out, froze them out. Some people say, well, black folk can compete if we educate them. Wrong. Didn't work. When black folk came out of slavery in 1866, they had a 98% illiteracy rate. That means only 2% of the blacks in the United States could read and write in 1860s. But by 1900s, blacks reduced their illiteracy rate from 98% down to 40%. Blacks learned faster than all those white immigrants that came into America. Blacks cut their illiteracy rate faster than all the European immigrants. But when I went back and did analysis on job mobility and on money and wealth, guess what happened? The whites that came in, they went up, blacks went down, which means education was not the factor. So you tell a child to get an education, and you don't deal with racism, it won't do any good. And I got blacks all over the country telling me, so Dr. Anderson, it's time for black folk to put racism behind them. Black people cannot put racism behind you because you didn't put it in front of yourselves. You don't have the power to put anything behind you. And the most dangerous thing you can do is to start talking about cutting yourself away from your history and the fact of racism. Because let me tell you all why. And remember this, there's only 3 ways we could have possibly gotten into our dilemma. Either we were where we are because God wished it up here, or because we are genetically inferior down here, or because somebody's been playing games in social engineering. One of those 3. Now, I don't believe God wished black folk to be in this dilemma. But yet, the dominant white society taught that and used their churches from 1600s up until 1860 to say that God wished it. The blacks somehow were smited, being an offshoot of Ham. Remember that? They used the Bible to teach that black folk were inferior and that you were justifiably slaves. Then from 1860s up until present day, they've been using genetic. That's why you got a book called The Bell Curve, saying that you're genetically inferior. That's why you're in your dilemma. And what I tell blacks over, both of those are tails. You're where you are because you've been socially engineered. The last thing, people have been playing games with you, manipulating the circumstances, controlling you. And if somebody has socially engineered you into your dilemma, the only way you're going to get out is for somebody to take the responsibility of what? Socially engineering you out. And that's why I created the Harvest Institute. And so what we're doing now is trying to go back and understand everything that's happened to black folk, and I'm trying my best in my books, in my institute, to turn everything upside down and give you a halfway fighting chance to come out of it as a winner. I don't want you to lose anymore. I'm tired of black folk losing. Okay? So let me finish up this little bit of history and we'll get into the solutions, because I've only got about 38 minutes left. Now here's what happened. So by 1900s, when Jews began to come into the country, what they were doing then, they came in looking for wealth building opportunities. Go look at all their basic documents for their organizations. They came in looking to build businesses and to find wealth and money. When our organization came in, the Urban League and NAACP, between 1905 and 1912, what they looked for black folk was going back to that old public policy that was set up in 1660 saying black folks should be a labor, subordinated, non-compensated labor class. So what they were looking for us was to do what? Find what? Jobs. Which means you were to be employees. Never employers, but to be employees. And so immediately after the First World War, blacks started getting a little uppity when they came back from World War I. And the whites in the South didn't like that, and so you had major conflicts. And so racism intensified in the country. Blacks had farms. Some of the white radical groups started burning their crops. They started lynching on average of 2 to 3 blacks a day. And they poured kerosene on their cotton and ran blacks out of the South. Those blacks then, by 1920, were moving north. They moved into Gary, Detroit, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, New York, and went into the factories. And when they started moving out, whites then started working on trying to get a replacement for them. Because at that point in time, black folk could pick on average about 20 pounds of cotton an hour. So whites started inventing a machine. And by 1940s, blacks had invented a machine called a cotton picking machine that can now pick 1,000 pounds of cotton an hour. So by 1947, black folk were obsolete in the South. They no longer needed you in the South. You were through in the South by 1947, machine that replaced you. But all those blacks who drifted north in those big cities had gone into the steel mills, automobile plants, chemical plants, meat packing plants. And we're doing reasonably well. Blacks did reasonably well in the north between about 1940 and 1966 in those factories. Then all of a sudden in about 1966, guess what happened again? Technology caught up. And black folk went obsolete in the north. And ironically, blacks went obsolete in 1966, right in the midst of the Civil Rights Movement. When Martin Luther King was saying, free at last, thank God we're free at last, he was not talking about black folk. He was talking about, for the first time in history, whites no longer needed black folk. And whites were free. They now had invented a computer. And computer-driven machinery, they no longer needed you. So the factories started closing down in the north at that point in time. And that's when your crime started going up too. Because not only they started closing down and firing blacks in those major cities, but at that point in time, the public policy on black folks shifted to what it is today. Now the old public policy, remember, was that black folk were being excluded, subordinated, non-compensated, non-competitive, managed workforce for the personal confidence and wealth building of white society. They shifted it to where it is today. As soon as black people became obsolete in 1966 in the middle of the Civil Rights Movement, the new policy was this. 3 things that whites came up with. 1, that no white person in any responsible position will take any responsibility for what's happened to black folk in the past. 2, nobody's going to feel any guilt for what's happened to black folk. And 3, that nobody will approve any programs, public policies that will shift the resources from whites to blacks. That's why they're anti-affirmative action, anti-preference treatment, anti-set-aside, and anything else. They're not going to let the wealth shift into the hands of blacks under any circumstance. And so because at that point in time, not only had you become obsolete, but they had you nailed to the wall. And so in the Civil Rights Movement, we had made 3 fatal mistakes by then, and we never knew it. I was the only black in politics in Florida in the governor's office in 1970. Here are the mistakes that occurred. 1 is throughout the Civil Rights Movement, black people never had a plan. Never had a plan in all those years. All they simply do was they ran from one civil rights movement and one demonstration and riot to the next. To this very day, blacks don't have a plan. And whites have had plans on us since 1638. You don't have a national plan. No black in America knows where he's going and how he's going to get there, what he's supposed to do. Can you imagine 36 million people, no idea about what they're going to do? The second mistake we had made is that somehow they thought by taking down the signs over the bathrooms, over the water fountains, by where blacks could sit, somehow you were dealing with racism. They thought racism was the stuff I keep telling you about. They thought the slogans were racism. That was not racism. Racism was 4 floors down. They never touched racism during the civil rights movement. Allowing a black person to sit on the bus is immaterial. Allowing a black to go into a hotel is a waste of time. Can he pay to get out? And the third mistake we made was that we never created an institution that would educate our young black kids. On how to deal with racism, that we could give them a plan and they would be trained as a leadership class to pick up that plan and run with it. So between 1966 and 1996, black youth fell through the cracks because we let them down. We let them down for a number of reasons. One, because we pursued integration when we should have been pursuing desegregation. Now, what does I mean by that? Desegregation means just stop the government from using its power and resources to deprive you. And what most blacks thought they were getting was assimilation. Assimilation means they wanted to move in, intermarry with whites, and disappear, just like the Asians and the Hispanics can do. Whites never gave you assimilation. They gave you integration. Integration is another something behind the counter. Integration is a weaker form of segregation. Now you're weaker than you ever were. Remember I told you about the strong will win, the weak will suffer, the majority will win? Integration means that you have now been scattered into pieces. You have no power. Power doesn't come from individuals. It comes from the group. You all should never do anything as individuals. Do it as a group. Okay? In this church, you all stick together all times. Stick together as a group and stay behind your leader. And they can't get to you. Integration also took away your leadership. The minute you integrated, what you did, you accepted Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole as your leaders. That's why black leadership disappeared. When you integrate, that means you become a guest. Integration means black people become G-U-E-S-T-S. You're a guest. You're a guest in everything everybody else owns and controls. You're a guest in their hotels, their restaurants, their airlines, their neighborhoods, their schools. You don't own anything in America because you volunteered to become guests. And before integration, blacks had their own communities. They had their own resources. They had their own businesses all over this country. And you young people here today, you don't know it, but I'm telling you, black folk had viable, competitive communities before integration. They had clean communities. We did not have the crime in the black communities. As a matter of fact, before integration, most blacks in America never had to lock their doors. And a part of the problem is we don't lock because we didn't have locks on the doors. You got scared to put a chair under the door. And you left your window up all the time because you didn't have air conditioning. And most blacks in the South, where I grew up, when the mother would leave home, she'd say, "Miss Jones, I'm going downtown, watch the house." And I could walk, as a child, I could walk through almost every house in my neighborhood, through the front door and the back door was open, nobody cared. Or I could go into a house and borrow some sugar and go home, nobody cared. And everybody knew each other. But what they did with integration, they took the Highway Act and said, if you all want to immigrate, you're going to come here without any power and resources. So they took the Expressway of 1952 Act and they drove an expressway through every black community in America. And so now any city I go to, I can find a black neighborhood by finding the expressway. Either the black neighborhood will be up over it, underneath it, or beside it. And now you have no black businesses. And in North Carolina, where I grew up, my family was the only family that had a part ownership and the only black bus line in the entire United States. We didn't have a bus line with 3 or 4 buses. We had the biggest bus line in the state, and the only one in America for blacks. We had over 500 buses. We service the black neighborhoods and the white neighborhoods. What put us out of business was not Duke Powell, who we put out of business. What put us out of business was integration. Because when Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks integrated the buses down in Montgomery, and black folk wanted to sit on the front of the bus. When they got to North Carolina, the people in North Carolina, the blacks said, we want to sit on the front of the white buses too. And we said, but we don't have any white buses up here. They said, well, get some so we can sit on the front of them. And so we went out of business. We had black cab companies. We had 2 black cab companies, the Harris and Camel City cab companies. They went out of business. You know why? Blacks didn't want to ride in the black cabs anymore. They want to ride in the white cabs. They wanted to ride in the yellow cab and the bluebird cab. We had our own theaters. We had the Lafayette, the Lincoln Theater chain all over America. We had film companies in Jacksonville, Florida. Norman Productions in Jacksonville made black westerns and black love romance films. We had a black studio in Chicago and a black studio here in Hollywood called Hollywood Productions. It was black owned. We made our own films. Now we have no studios, no distribution system, and no theaters. And what I'm telling you all is you're going backwards. We had mattress factories, we had broom factories, we had blacks in the oil drilling companies. We had a black railroad line in Jacksonville, Florida. We had another black railroad company in Oklahoma. And now we have nothing in the entire United States because integration took it away from us. The other thing the integration does for you, you got to understand, integration also is draining your capital. All your money now is moving out of your community into the white community. Okay? Black America right now is the 9th richest nation on earth. We got approximately $380 billion worth of disposable income. We're richer than Sweden, Australia, Canada, Pakistan, India, and all the black African countries put together. But we're the poorest nation on earth because we violate every principle of economics. Your money is supposed to stay inside your community and bounce 8 to 12 times before it leaves. Black money does not bounce one time. You know why it doesn't bounce one time? Because you don't have any communities to bounce it in. You're so busy integrating. Where are you going to bounce it? How are you going to pass it through another black hand? So as soon as a black person gets paid, before it touches another black hand, he runs right to the suburbs and spends it. He spends 95% of his money immediately outside his own community. He keeps 5% to take back into his community. Out of 5% he takes back into his community, he spends 3% of that in non-black owned hands in his own communities. Look around your neighborhood, goes into non-black owned businesses. Only 2% again, only 2% of all the black people in America keep their own money in their own communities. And then out of the 2% they keep, they then take that down to a white bank and put it in the bank, can't even get a loan. And now you're bankrupt. You go bankrupt every 24 hours, this is regular clock, and whites don't take you serious. They know that anybody who goes bankrupt every 24 hours should not be taken seriously. You started raising Cain outside their store, they say, hey, wait a minute, it's 3 o'clock, wait for those blacks, they'll go bankrupt in about another 3 hours. They know you're going to violate all the rules. So the reason we don't have any black businesses in America is for 3 reasons. 1, we've never had a national plan to start building black businesses in the country. That's why I wrote my book. That's why you got a plan now. 2 is that whites and other groups are boycotting your neighborhoods. They're boycotting you. And 3, we're boycotting our own neighborhoods and our own stores. That's why we don't have anything. Now, as long as you live, you will never see a white person get up on a Saturday morning, drive down to a black neighborhood, and get out of his car and go into a black store to buy something made by a black person. If you do, take a picture of it. You have something very valuable one day. All over America, on Friday evenings, go to any big city, and you'll see blacks lined up to get into Chinatown, to go to China, eat some Chinese food. Have you ever seen Chinese lined up trying to get into a black town? Somebody is not playing with a full deck. You're not playing the game to win, you're just playing. And you got to stop spending your money. So then I go to various cities, and blacks got the nasty habit, when company comes, putting them in their car on a Sunday and taking them out to the white community and say, let me go out and show you some nice white homes. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Let's go out to look at the white malls. And then they come back home and say, how in the world can white folk afford all those fine homes and big houses? It's easy. It's your money. You see what I'm saying? And y'all think I'm teasing. See, they're living off of 2 incomes. They live off 100% of their income and 95% of yours. And you're trying to live off of 2%. It is humanly impossible for a race of people to live off of 2% of their income. And in America, you equate human worth based on what you own. And if black folk don't own 2%, that's why white racists say, black folk ain't worth 2 cents. Because we don't own anything, and human worth is equated in this country based on what you own and control. And we violate all the premises of economics. We have yet to learn how to practice group economics. And the last thing about integration is that integration got a quota system, and you need to know this. It's got a quota system. You hear white somebody against quotas? They're wrong. It's got a quota system. Anytime you get more than 5 to 8% of blacks involved in anything, whites are going to put up chains. They're going to stop you. If more than 5 to 8% of blacks move into their community, they're going to put their house up for sale. If more than 5% of the blacks, 8% of the blacks go into their schools, they're going to pull their kids out of school. If more than 5 to 8% of the blacks come into their businesses, they're going to move the business out of town, cross town, out of the country. If more than 5 to 8% of the blacks come into their association, they'll resign. They got a quota system. And people say, well, blacks are against affirmative action. No, they're not against affirmative action. They're against affirmative action for you. You see, they say, well, they're against the set-aside. Racism is nothing but preferential treatment for whites. They say they're against preferential treatment. You hear them say they're against set-asides. Jim Crowism was nothing but a 100-year set-aside program for whites, where they set aside the best restaurants, the best food, the best schools for whites. They say they're against quotas. You got a quota system, I told you, in the immigration laws. Today, you still are a planned minority. You can't win. So now let me get to some solutions for you very quickly in my few more minutes I got left. What we're going to do across this country now is what's called Powernomics. That's a new book coming out called Powernomics, Unleashing Black America's Potential. It's a follow-up to the book Black Labor, White Wealth. It'll show you in very specific terms what you got to do to be competitive. The things you got to focus on is in broad categories with specific principles. The first is a community. You cannot do anything unless you have a community. Your community is your social cohesiveness. The only power, the potential that black people have in America is your social, racial cohesiveness. If you don't have that, you have no power. Forget about everything else. That's a fact of life. You got to have a community, because the community will give you your businesses. It'll give you your sales opportunities in your markets. Now, how do you develop communities? The first thing you must do is stay out of all cross-purpose issues. Cross-purpose means horizontal issues. Don't get involved in any horizontal issues. Let me explain it to you. I see the puzzlements in your eyes. First, racism is vertical. Remember this. Racism is straight up and down. Racism means I don't care whether you're the lowest income black or the highest, the best educated or the least educated. It doesn't make any difference. You're all in the same tube. Okay? That's what Malcolm X was asking, what is a black man with a PhD? Remember that saying? And he answered, well, he's still a Negro. Okay? It means it doesn't make any difference. You're all in it together. That's straight up and down. Horizontal issues are any issue that pertains to everybody, stay out of it. You're the weakest and poorest and most vulnerable people. Don't get involved in it. Because the only people that can benefit are those people who are directly behind where the horizontal crosses the vertical. Okay? The only people that benefit are where those 2 points cross. That's too small. You don't have that kind of energy and resources to waste. Now, what's a horizontal issue? Sexism is a horizontal issue. If you get into these various religious issues, that's a horizontal issue. Poverty is a horizontal issue. I keep telling some of my civil rights leaders, stay away from poverty. You cannot eradicate poverty. Poverty is a fixed, it's a given. You're always going to have poor people. And people say, well, you're going to have poor Greeks, poor Indians, poor Lithuanians, poor Hungarians. Quit trying to eradicate poverty and try to get as many black folk as you out and leave poverty alone. But they try to eradicate something that can't be eradicated. Culturalism. That's a horizontal issue, and it pertains to everybody. Let me give you about sexism, for instance. I tell black women who always want to get into sex issue, they think that somehow that the issue is sex rather than racism. See, my great-grandmother was not enslaved because she's a woman. She was enslaved because she was black. Okay? And if you're going to get into sexism, I want black women to understand this, to keep your priorities in order. If I say abracadabra right now and sexism disappeared, you still can't go in a place because you're black. And if you keep it in order, remember what your mother felt. The minute she knew she was pregnant, she knew at that moment she was going to have what? A black child long before she knew the sex. So you keep your priorities straight and say, since my color came before my sex, I'm going to keep it in that order. You always stay black first. So stay out of those cross prepositions. I'll explain out the next time I come back out here on a Powernomics workshop or something. But that's very important. I can show you all the problems you got with that. And see, but once you stay out of those horizontal issues, like I tell some of my Muslim friends, I said, don't be worried about pushing Islamic faith. Push your skin color first and stay aligned with your people. And I tell them, the people in the Baptist church, quit worrying about about being a Baptist and worry about being black. And again, I have to give credit to your minister. It seems like he's one of the few in the country who understands that. That you put who you are and as a people before you start talking about what denomination you belong to. And especially since most of the denominations on the earth all work together to enslave black folk. All of them pimp and hustle black folk. The Catholics, the Protestants, the Baptists, the Jews, and everybody else got black folk. But what we're going to do then is start, once we get past building these communities, then we're going to start getting into what we call building alternative economic structures. That's very important. You got to build your own alternative economic structure. An alternative economic structure, in the short time I haven't got time to explain it, is nothing but building your own city, your own communities, your own towns. Building a lot of small sub-communities all over America. You build a community of markets, a community of producers, a community of distributors, a community of retailers. And we all interconnect all over the country and build a vertical order. Let me give you an example, for instance. The reason I'm down in Tuskegee and down in New Orleans is because, as an example, we're trying to build 12 major industries in America. The first one is seafoods. Why am I picking seafoods? Because one of the first principles of Powernomics is you must always dominate economically wherever you dominate in population. We, as black folk, are one of the largest consumers of seafood in America. We must dominate in seafood production. So what I did down there was go down there and I got blacks now who are raising seafood in ponds. They're growing crabs, oysters, clams, catfish, trout, and bass. I'm building 1,000 acres of sea ponds, food ponds, aqua ponds, where they're raising seafoods. Now, I got blacks in the farmers now. They're going to raise grain, wheat, soybean, corn, and wheat. They're going to make the feed for us to feed those fish. Now, when that comes up, I'm heading out here next week. I'm building and putting in $5 million into a processing plant in the South. I don't name the city because I don't want people to try to cut me off. But we're building our own processing plant. All that seafood then is bought from those black farmers. Those blacks that got land and not using, they're now going into business and making money raising seafood and raising feed. And blacks are now going to be hauling that feed over those ponds. And I'm asking for people to raise the money to build the ponds. And we already got about 5 ponds coming up already. And now, when it comes up, all that seafood is being picked up and shipped to our plant. And in our plant, as I said, the plant's cost almost $5 million, $4.5 million to $5 million. We already got $30 million worth of sales already on the books going through the plant. Okay? Now, once that seafood comes into that plant, it's processed, diced, sliced, and prepared. And then it's shipped out of there up north. I've identified 12 major cities in the north where I'm building receiverships, distributorships for that seafood to be trucked up to and sold out of there. Detroit, Michigan, New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Houston, Oakland, California, and New Orleans. And so people ask me about Los Angeles. Now, when the food gets there, we're going to have a freezer where all that food is stored. And then we're setting up franchises, fast food franchises, that food would then be transferred over to restaurants. Now, we got the prototype restaurants up now in South Dade. 2 restaurants. They are fast food restaurants called Fish Cities. They're selling the fish and all kind of seafoods with a special kind of menu. Now, McDonald's and Burger King, our 2 competitors on both sides, let's do about $780,000 a year. We do twice what McDonald's and Burger King do and sell, okay? Our stores sell $1.5 million. They're doing $1.5 million a year, both stores. And our stores, we got traffic around our stores 2 blocks long, 24 hours a day around the store. And they're all black owned. So they can't cut us off. I got us locked in from the seafood to the grain, all the way to the restaurants in the market. Okay? And the only way they can get me out is to turn my people against us. And they can't turn us against us because I love my folk too much and they think too much of what I'm trying to do for them, so they can't get us out. Okay. And so in those cities, we're selling those franchises to blacks at half what it costs to go into a Burger King store. Burger King store costs you about $550,000 to start a store. Our seafood place costs you about $250,000. And you bring back twice the profits. Okay? So we are beating them in that score. Now, also along the line, we're setting up other kinds of operations. Blacks will be going into the trucking business, servicing that. It's vertically ordered. And some blacks will be selling the restaurant suppliers, the security service, the building the stores, the insurance and stuff, the employment agencies. And in each city, our stores will produce something like about 50 businesses per store just in seafoods. Per city, 50 businesses per city. And any blacks can get these franchises, and you all going to have a chance to get them out here in Los Angeles. We're going to come to Los Angeles someplace like next June. At that point in time, save your money and start raising capital. Now, I'm telling you what we're doing down in New Orleans, so you know that down in New Orleans, we don't have one black tourist area in America. And again, I want my people to come together and build a community. So when I was down in New Orleans, I was going through the black community trying to find the old black community. In New Orleans, right now, when people go there, they got the French quarters, all white, no blacks down in that area. I've gone over and identified an area now where we're going to rebuild a black community there. And I got 2 blocks of land down there. I'm going to put in black clubs there with black entertainment for a jazz club, a blues club, and a popular club. We're going to put in black restaurants. And we're also going to put in souvenir shops. And we're doing it vertically. And we come out with a national campaign asking all blacks in America, since we don't have a black tourist area in America, plan your conferences only in New Orleans. When you go to New Orleans, I'm asking blacks down there to save your money and help me buy some mini buses. I want about 10 mini buses to set up a bus service schedule to go in and out of every hotel to haul those blacks over to that community where they can be entertained and be fed and dined and wined and taken back to the hotel until we build our own hotel in New Orleans. New Orleans has about a 67% black population. They don't own anything in the whole city. And we're going to change that and turn it around. That's what I was in New Orleans for, and we're getting it together real fast. We're getting all kinds of support. Not only all support from blacks, I got a lot of whites all over the country trying to help us too. They understand the need. So get one thing clear now. All whites are not bad. That's what I'm saying. We got a heck of a lot of whites that are helping us all over the country trying to solve this problem. Because a lot of them understand, they know that we cannot make it otherwise, so they're helping us. Same thing, and let me give you one other example. The third business coming up is leather. I'm trying to get blacks to compete in the leather industry. Now, right now, most of our leather is coming in from Taiwan, Korea, Hong Kong, China. And the reason they're going that way is because they got environmental laws where they can produce the leather cheaper by the labor and also by the environmental restrictions for tanning. I found out how to beat them, so we're going to build a leather industry. I'm trying to get blacks together now. We're going to set up our leather procurement system in Florida. We're going to buy skins, reptile, cows, sheepskin, cow skin. We're going to have a procurement system in Florida. We're trying to build a tannery in Haiti. There's no cheaper labor market in the world than Haiti. And we're going to build a tanning plant there where those blacks will have a chance to own that plant along with blacks in America. And while the Asians are shipping their leather to Hong Kong and China to be processed, which will take 60 days, I can ship mine over there in 3 days in Florida and get it tanned and get it back. Okay. When that leather comes back in the United States, I'm trying to set up 2 plants. One plant in New York and one in Pittsburgh, where blacks will own a plant. It's a cut and sew operation. That leather come in there, they can produce at least 5 different kinds of leathers. Leather for furniture, leather for shoe leather. They're going to produce utilitarian leather, also wear leather, purse bag, and belt leather. Okay? Once that leather's been produced in those cut and sew factories, it's going to be sent all over the United States to 2 major distribution centers, one in the west and one in the north. where blacks like you all can say, I want to be a distributor of that leather. I want to be a warehouser, a wholesaler of that leather, any of it. Then we're going to put retail shops in the malls in each city and in all these communities where you can sell black-owned leather. Then I'm asking the black entertainers, athletes in America, it's quick going on TV, advertising Japanese and Asian leather, advertise good black leather. And so we're going to build a leather industry where you have your own chances, your own industry, and own your own businesses. And as I said, we're going to sink our roots into the ground and grow tall and strong, and nobody can pull us up. And we're going to have our own communities built around our own industries. And each and every one of you have a chance to go into your own businesses where you'll be dependent upon the black above you and the black beneath you. To depend on them, okay? Buy from your own people, trust and love your own people, because nobody else cares about you. You don't have any incentives or interest in black folk in America anymore. And the last one I'm going to give a point is Detroit, Michigan. Going into Detroit, Michigan is 84% black. Now I go into the city, they got a black mayor, a black city council, a black board of education, and a black school superintendent, and a black police chief. They said, Dr. Anderson said, since you're here, we're going to give you a trophy and a plaque. Say something nice to us. I said, first of all, if I say something nice, what are you doing for black folk in the city? They said, we got an office of minority business. I said, you got an office of minority business? They said, yeah. I said, that's the first office you should have closed down. You got an 84% black city, and you got an office of minority business for black folk? They said, yes. I said, somebody is not, the light's on, but nobody's home. The first thing you must learn is when you become the majority, you must act like the majority. You see what I'm saying? In Detroit, Michigan, it's just reversed. You got an 84% black city, and you got and a 3% white population. The blacks are acting like they're the minority, and then when they're the majority, and the white minority is acting like they're the majority. So everything downtown is owned by whites, everything in the city is owned by whites. Blacks own nothing. And because the blacks can't get their mentality straight about learning how to practice and learn how to win. And so I go look at the contracts for services and goods in a city like Detroit, 97% of everything in Detroit for services and goods and contracts go to whites, and the city is 84% black. Because blacks don't understand that they'll still be winning. And I told them, I said, first, they said, what would you do? I said, first of all, I would sue all of you. Because that's against the law. Because you see, our good jurist, Clarence Thomas, has already ruled, saying that you cannot bypass a majority to give to a minority. You all got to get tricky. When you become the majority, you practice that. Say, oh, we're the majority now. You see? When you build these communities, you become the majority. And you start to winning. Because remember, the majority wins, the minority loses. And as long as every time you use the word minority, you say, I'm a loser. It creates a negative mindset. Quit putting that negative mindset in your children's head. And say, when you become the majority, we're going to win. And so therefore, I say, I'll take all of you to court. And the same thing in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is 77% black. And the white developers just went to court to sue blacks in Washington, D.C., saying that they want that the 20% set aside for minorities in the water system there is unfair for to be giving minorities anything. And I agree. I said, you're right. I said, because the whites are the minority. And would you all believe that blacks, they're fighting to preserve a minority program in a city where they are the majority? Because they can't switch gears. And so what's happening in this country now is now people have become paralyzed. They're just like a deer standing on the highway at night in the bright headlights of an oncoming truck. They can't figure out what it is, paralyzed, standing there frozen and getting run over. So what's frozen them is this whole concept of a colorblind society. You do not live in a colorblind society. What that whole concept means is let's pretend that we're colorblind and don't see black folk. Now, that concept came out of one of the think tanks again. And the think tanks came up with a solution, say, how do we maintain this inequity where whites are 50-foot giants and blacks are 1-foot midgets? They say, pretend that everything that black folk want, that you've already given it to them. They say they want freedom, say abracadabra, you got it. See, they're not empowering you. They're just giving you symbols and slogans rather than the tools. You want to be equal? Abracadabra, you equal. You want equal opportunity? Abracadabra, you all got it. And so now all the conservative elements of this country have figured out if they go back and take the language of the civil rights movement and use it against black folk can't move. because black folk can't figure out what to do, like that deer on the highway. If forward discrimination took them too far into the garage, the only way you can get the car out of the garage is put it in reverse. They said, no, y'all can't put it in reverse. That's reverse discrimination. We admit that we use forward discrimination to get it in there, but y'all can't use reverse discrimination to get it out. You see? So therefore, you got to keep the car in neutral. And we got to have a race-neutral society now. And that way, however things exist now, it is stuck and frozen like that. And let's pretend we're a colorblind society. And so consequently, nobody wants to look after my people anymore. They just stand there frozen on the highway. And I'm very much concerned. I got all kind of plans on the Powernomics, how we can solve some of these problems. Same thing in politics. In politics, start teaching your people to be responsible. And don't vote for anybody who runs for office, green, yellow, black, if he would not deliver back to the black community. Okay? Politics is a process that simply defines who's going to get what out of life. But it must be based on quid pro quo. Everybody you put in the office must deliver something very specifically back to the black community. Don't let them get off the hook by saying, well, I'll hire a black person. I don't care. Clinton will give you that same tale. I'm going to hire a black. I don't care who he puts as a secretary. That's not the issue. What is the black community going to get back in return for its vote? And that's why they keep sucking you don't ever get anything. Because we don't raise Cain. It must be quid pro quo, something for something. If we give you something, you owe us something back to the race. And that's why in the last election, I was Clinton's political advisor in Maryland. Clinton got 41% of the white vote, 42% of the Hispanic vote, and 43.4% of the female vote. But 92% of the black vote hasn't done anything for blacks yet. Because nobody wants to do anything for us because we don't demand and insist on it. And you must hold everybody accountable. If a black person runs for office, you go after him and take him out of office too. Any way you can, okay? I know my time is up. I've been watching my clock. My time is just about up, but I would spend a lot of time teaching you how to play politics. There are a lot of rules in Powernomics. But the thing I'm telling you in conclusion is everything you do, play it to win. Practice group economics, group politics, build alternative economic structures, redesign your school systems. Right now, people are saying school systems are failing blacks. The school systems are not failing blacks. The school systems are doing exactly what they were originally designed to do. That was to produce blacks who were marginally educated to work for whites. But now, as I told you, is that blacks are obsolete. They don't need your kids anymore. They don't need half-educated kids anymore. And so what you should do is go back and close down the assembly line and get your plan and say, we will now rebuild our schools across black America based on the needs of black Americans. In other words, what I'm saying to you is this. If I told you all right now we were going to the moon, and we agreed to go to the moon, now our schools will know what to do. Because now they say if black folk going to the moon, you see, you got some direction. And now the school system say, well, now we got to produce more mechanics and more astronauts and more physicists and biochemicals. We got to prepare for that. But right now the school system is still operating the way they were designed in 1867, was to produce black folk who were marginally educated people. And nobody wants our kids. Our kids keep telling you all that. That's why right now in the large cities, 65% of all the black kids that start nursery school never graduate from high school. They're telling you something, you're not listening. They're saying you're dysfunctional. There's no use in going to school. The school doesn't mean anything. There are no businesses in my community. There's no health. There's nothing in my neighborhood worth staying into. Go back and develop a national plan about where your people want to go, and then transmit that plan to every black individual, every black corporation, every black association. And then we can do it. We got the expertise, we got the skills, we got a little bit of money, and the last thing we got to do is get rid of a lot of our black leadership. Okay? All these black leaders in America now that head up our 2 or 3 major institutions keep talking about looking out for everybody but black folk. You tell them that day is over. Nobody's going to sell black folk anymore. The day of selling black folk over. If you want to sell them, you better find yourself another job. Because right now black folk are hurting too much, and it's too bad for us in this world to keep letting black folk get up there and get in these high positions and talk about everybody but black folk. If you don't want to be black, go home and sit down and look at TV. And I tell all my friends, even those who are looking at the rainbow, talking about a rainbow coalition, as I'm telling you, there is no blackness in the rainbow. And if you want a rainbow, look inside my race and you'll find it. Look at this beautiful rainbow of people. All the colors you want. There's my rainbow. And I love you all and thank you very much. Thank you.